Thank you for coming on this night where they are predicting snow, but I think they're kidding. I think all of you know me, but I'm Beth Fisher-Yoshida, Director of the Program, Negotiation and Conflict Resolution, and I'll let our other esteemed panel members introduce themselves.
Robert Anderson, I teach the course Selfassessment.
And I'm Jenny Besch. I teach advanced mediation.
Applause are welcome. It's okay. So what I do notice in the audience is that most of the people are from the NECR program, but even though you still probably don't know each other, a lot of you, because some of you have already graduated, some of you have come in at different times, so it'd be a really good opportunity to network with each other and the people who are also non-NECR people, and part of what we're going to be talking about is networking and what that role plays in career development. So one of the reasons why we wanted to have this evening is because we realize that unless you're in a situation where people are walking around with machetes and machine guns and there's obvious conflict, people don't get what we do in this program and how you can use the skills and the concepts that you learn here in the real world, quotes, real world, right? So what we wanted to do is give you some ideas about how we use this information when we try to work with clients in different places and organizations, communities, community mediation centers, and so on. And then maybe we can learn from each other in that process. Some of you may already be doing some of the things and saying some of the things we're already saying, and maybe not. Maybe you'll pick up some tips about how to frame what you're doing in a way. I was talking to somebody who does a lot of career development, and he was saying that knowing how to target and how to pitch what you're doing to the right target audience is critical in being able to do good career development. So that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. So the goal is that first Jenny, then Robert, then I will say a few words, and then we'll open it up for Q&A and discussion. So it could be a dialogue. We don't have to be the only people with expertise in the room. Other of you have expertise in the room. So afterwards, everybody can just get into a dialogue, and that will be fine and enriching. Okay?
Again, I'm Jenny Besch, and I teach advanced mediation in the program, and I'm really thrilled to see how many people are here, though I'm worried that that just means that the ranks of the unemployed is growing. But let me tell you a little bit about who I am and what I do and why I do it and how long I've been doing it, and then how what I do is applicable to other areas. I come to this world of mediation via the theater. So for those of you that are saying, I don't know, transition, change my life, do something different, I think it's all completely possible. I did it. And right now I run a mediation center. In New York State, the Unified Court System underwrites a program called the Community Dispute Resolution Centers Program. And it provides for a mediation center in every county in the state of New York. There are 62 counties, but some of us run centers that bridge more than one county. Mine is the Westchester and Rockland Mediation Center, so I have 2 counties. All of the 62 counties have a mediation center that they can access, and the mediation centers are designed to provide alternative dispute resolution through the courts, and also through self-referral, referral from other not-for-profits, government agencies. We also engage in teaching and training mediators. And it's a very broad program, and each community dispute resolution center has different programs. So I'm just going to tell you about the nature of the programs that I have. We have a community mediation program which does mediation in the courts and on a self-refer basis, quality of life issues, noise issues, consumer, merchant, landlord, tenant, dogs in apartments, that there's no dog allowed, that kind of thing. We have an eviction prevention program where we assist people who are capable of capturing future rents but have fallen behind. We work with them and their landlords to get them back on track, and agencies that will provide funding so long as they can evidence that they can carry forward. We do a family court mediation program where we provide custody visitation mediation for people in the family court, and that may be people who have children together but have never been married, so they wouldn't be going through divorce because there is no marriage to take apart, but they still have family and they need to address the issues that are pertinent to the family. We do divorce mediation as well, and we have a restorative justice program where we deal with matters involving criminal justice and mediating those cases. so that people can really access justice in a sense of the victim in a regular court case. The victim is simply a witness for the state for the most part, unless it's a civil suit, right? So if something happens to you, you've been mugged, you've been robbed, you've been raped, you've been anything, you have been reduced to a witness for the state. The state is considered the injured party. And what restorative justice, victim offender mediation does is it returns some power to the victim and allows them to enter into a dialogue to really express what has harmed them. So it's a very interesting area. All of our areas are fascinating, but these specialty areas seem to attract the most attention, and I can understand why. So that's the breadth of what we do at the Mediation Center. In addition, we do a great deal of training, and the training isn't always directed at people who want to be mediators. Just for an example, tomorrow I'm going to be doing a CLE program, that's continuing legal education program, at Pace Law School. Parenting plan training for divorce mediators, people who really work with people generally in an advocacy, an adversarial fashion, but also to take into consideration the kinds of things that will return to us when that agreement starts to fall apart, and that is the parenting plan. And it's a really interesting dynamic to be working with attorneys in this area, because it means that I and they have to shift the way we think about one another and about the context of the material. So it's been challenging. I've done some of this before, and it's always challenging, and I'm looking forward to doing it again. But the world of mediation isn't just mediation. It has resonance for the legal profession and for many other professions. And in fact, you see an awful lot of attorneys coming in to take training in mediation, in part because they see it's a new revenue stream, but also because I think a lot of attorneys feel as though they've kind of had it with all of the adversarial stuff. And I have some attorneys who refer to themselves as recovering attorneys. But some of them make brilliant mediators. So it's not that if you aren't trained originally in this and it is in you don't have to be a certain kind of person in your core. You have to be willing to expand your core. And that's what I think this mediation helps people to do. And similarly, you don't need to use mediation just as a mediator. You might use the skills you learn in mediation in a host of areas. And that's sort of the bridge onto what we're taking you across right now, which is, so how do I use this stuff? It's great, I'm taking this course, but what do I do with it? I just had a woman today actually call me up to try to figure out, well, should I take mediation training because I want to make a career move, and so how do I do that? And can I make a living as a mediator? There are certainly people who make a living as a mediator. Many of them have law degrees. Many of them are either attached to the financial world, and so they can marry some of those things together. But you don't have to be any of those things, and you don't have to mediate to use the mediative skills. These skills are used in all sorts of businesses. The most important skill to me is being able to listen effectively. And that skill is useful just about everywhere in terms of working with other people, especially when conflict arises, and I can't think of a single business in which conflict doesn't come to the table. And how you approach the conflict is critical. So mediative skills of asking valuable, informative questions, being able to listen and understand the conflict from somebody else's point of view. That is so valuable in human resource management. For those of you that have been in that or would like to be in that, I think you certainly can apply that to that. If you're in a managerial position or would like to be in a managerial position in any field, working with staff to build their investment in the work that you have at hand is the key. And so if you use these skills and the notions that are underwriting mediation and conflict resolution, you're going to find its application is almost everywhere. I don't know if any of you were in the healthcare field, but I'm in the process of teaching a course with Sarah Lawrence about mediation in healthcare, because boy, do they need it. And you'd be surprised how valuable it can be, not just from the administrative point of view, but helping doctors and nurses aides work more effectively with one another, with the patients' families, using all of these tools to form a more productive dialogue, because that's essentially what mediation does. It helps you form a productive dialogue. And as far as how you can use some of these skills in getting a job, I had this instance with a young man that we walk our dogs late at night. That's the only way I know him, except that when you walk your dog at 11 o'clock at night in the park, you become very friendly with one another. And he said to me he was going for a new job. He's an IT person, and he said and he's Japanese, and so he's always worried about that. He's native Japanese, and so his language skills are not 100%, so he's always nervous about the job interview. And he said to me, what do I say to them? What do I say? And I said, well, are you a good listener? Do you think you're a good listener? Yeah, because he's listening to me. He's trying to figure out what to say. And I said, I think if you can share that with them, that's something you hold as important. It's not just whether you can do it, but whether you value it. And he got the job. I don't think that's the only reason he got the job, but he certainly didn't blow his opportunity by not being able to express himself well enough. And he had a challenge because English is not his native language, and that can be a challenge for people. So understanding what is valuable to the person listening to you at a job interview, what are they, and using the kinds of tools that we have in mediation to express yourself clearly to them. That's so important, and to make it relevant to the kinds of things that they're interested in. You have to think about that connection and understand that they may not use all the same language that we use in the program, reflective listening, speaking from the eye. They're not going to listen to that, but if you can understand what's important to them and what those key things are, communication, listening, being willing to hear another point of view, all of those things make you a very attractive candidate. And I think some of those skills, at least I hope so, are the skills that we try and foster in the mediation component of this program. So I said I would talk for 10 minutes, and I just did exactly that. So I'm going to stop talking now and turn it over to Robert.
Okay, so I'm Robert Anderson, and I teach the Selfassessment course in the NECR program. And what I thought I would talk a little bit about this evening is sort of what I do, because sometimes people say, what do you do, how do you do it? And then I want to talk a little bit about the process of how I got to where I am, because I think for many of you, it's kind of, you maybe have a vision in mind, but you're not quite sure how to get there. And I've learned a few things along the way that were useful for me. I don't know if they'll necessarily be useful for you, but I thought I would share them, and then you can make up your own mind. So I'm an independent trainer and consultant. I have a small training company. It's called McDonald Anderson. And I've had the company for about 20 years now. The way that I got into conflict was, first of all, I got my degree in adult learning at Teachers College before I started my company. And also before I started my company, I took a course in conflict resolution at Teachers College. It was the basic practicum, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. It's very similar to what we do here at NECR. And so my main focus is training. So conflict resolution training and negotiation skills became one of the things that I offered to clients. And I was coming at that point out of Citigroup. I was a training manager at Citigroup. And so what I did is I added it to my package of skills of different things that I offered. So now the things that relate to kind of what you do, I do courses on things like listening skills, conflict resolution, negotiation skills, different kinds of communication training, assertiveness skills, and what I do is I do it internationally. My goal had always been to work my goal was always, when I was a kid, I always had this dream that someday I was going to do education and I was going to somehow do it in the world. And I've been able to do it somehow, and it's been really great. So let me talk to you a little bit about kind of the process that I use, because I think this is something that I learned. This is like 25 years ago. I read this book. Who was the person that was telling me that? Yes, it's called What Color is Your Parachute? Do you know that book? Yeah. They talk about informational interviewing. And then I read another book where they talk about planned happenstance. Has anybody heard of planned happenstance? Oh good, it's something new. It's kind of it's an oxymoron, right? Planned happenstance. The idea is that the way the world is today, it's very hard to have a linear idea of what your career is going to be, because you plan for your career and you say, in these many years that I'm going to get to this, but what happens is by the time you get there, the world has changed. So this guy, his name is John Krumboltz, says that what we have to focus is on what he calls planned happenstance. In other words, we still need to plan, but we need to be aware of the opportunities that are emerging all around us. And the implications for that is that we need to be in networks of people who are doing the kinds of things that we like to do. And so that was a really strong message for me 25 years ago when I started my networking as I was leaving Teachers College. At that time, I was working in a nonprofit organization doing training in the Puerto Rican and Hispanic community here in New York. And my idea was that I wanted to do kind of international training with the UN or with some other organization like that, where I could kind of do what I was doing locally and do it kind of internationally. So I read the book, and it said do informational interviews. How many have heard the term informational interviews? Okay, so most of you have heard it. But the whole idea around an informational interview is you try to meet the people who are doing what you want to do. So you call them up. Now I guess you can use email, but calling is even better because it's hard for people to say no when you have them on the phone, if you can catch them on the phone. And what you do is you say, so-and-so suggested that I give you a call, because I'm really, at that point, my goal was I'm really interested in doing training in Latin America, and I know that your company does training in Latin America, and someone told me that you would be a good person to talk to. So you get an appointment with the person, and then you interview them, and you always ask for 15 minutes of their time. This is straight from the book. This is like the rules of informational interview. It's straight from the book. So I do what people tell me. I follow the rules. So I went and I asked him, all these questions, and actually, the first person was somebody referred by my professor, and he happened to be the HR manager of a bank in New York. And I called him up, and I was like really scared, and I called him up, and he said, yeah, I'd be glad to talk to you. So I went one day at 8 in the morning before my job. I talked to him for 15 minutes. He told me about what they were doing in Latin America. And then I said, then you're supposed to say, is there anybody else I should be speaking to? He gave me a list of 3 other HR managers of 3 other banks. And so when I called up those managers, what you do is you say, John Smith from this company suggested I give you a call. So right away they hear John Smith and they go, oh, John Smith wants this. So it's like you kind of use that person's name to connect with this other person. So what I did was I went and I was really relentless with this. I think I set a goal of doing like 3 a week, and I did it for 15 weeks. So I did like 45 interviews where I went around and I talked to all these people.
Was Beth when you wanted that?
Well, Beth is a little story. She comes in a little bit later. So anyway, I didn't actually get a job, but what happened was there was a consulting company that sort of turned teachers into trainers, and they paid very little, but I was able to get a job there. And once I got there, I knew all of these people in the industry, and I was able to help them sell their services to all these people who I had met through my informational interviews. And then once I was there for about a year, I was able to move to this Wall Street company. And I actually didn't like the Wall Street company, but I was there for 3 years learning kind of how to do training in an organization. So then when I figured, well, now that I know this, I can do it independently. Because what I really wanted to do is I wanted to work internationally. So I quit my job, and I called up, actually I sent a fax in those days, the training manager in the Tokyo office. that I had met and I liked, of the company where I used to work. And I said, I'm coming to Tokyo, and I would really like to meet people who, maybe who would be willing to maybe hire me at some point. I'd like to do some more informational interviews. So she said, sure, I'll introduce you to some of the training managers here in Tokyo. So what I did was I went, and actually she created, there was like this group of training managers, and she had me do a presentation on, it was like presentation skills. So I met all these people, and then I went around and talked to everyone, and I found out that they would be willing to hire me if I would come to Japan. They wouldn't pay my way over, but if I would come, they would hire me. So, and that's when I met Beth. This is like 20 years ago.
1991.
1990, oh, it was even more than 20 years ago. And so then they, since my field is adult learning, they had all these people in the companies that they were training managers, but they didn't really know training. They were more like administrators. So their group decided to do a training program to train and be trainers. So I said, they hired me to do that program. And I thought, I'm either going to live or die in Tokyo, because if they don't like the program, I'll never work again in this town. But what happened was they liked it, and so what I began to do was every year I would go to Tokyo 3 times, and I would continue this process where wherever I would meet someone, I would try to get them to introduce me to other people. And what happens in Japan is everybody's kind of connected to the rest of Asia in those companies. So somebody gave me the name of somebody in Hong Kong, so I went to Hong Kong, I met that person, and I met other people, and so wherever I go, I always try to meet people, and I do the same thing. Do you have 50 minutes of your time? I'd like to just ask you some questions. And the interesting thing, particularly when you're starting out, is when you do an informational interview, it's like, and you all kind of know how to listen, so this is really dangerous stuff with you all, because you kind of listen to people, and when people feel listened to, it's like they like you, right? Nobody ever listens to anyone. And you ask them questions about their life and how they made their decisions. You're getting a lot of useful information about the industry or the field, and you're also getting somebody who likes you and takes an interest in you. So the thing that I think is really important is after you do the informational interview, you have to send a thank you note. People have do it, when people do it with me, I do it all the time with people who do informational interviews, and they don't send thank you notes. It's like, no, you're not following the rules. You have to follow the rules. You have to send a thank you note. And then, after you say to the person, is there anybody else I should be talking to? If you talk to any of those people, you have to get back to the original person and say, I talked to this person, and I really like them, blah, 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 blah. So what happens is everybody is already in a network. That was the thing that was dawned on me, which was, I thought I had to create the network. But in fact, everybody's already networked. What you have to do is get into the network. And once you make a positive impression on someone, they start passing you around to meet all these people. And so what I'm suggesting is, what happens is you're there kind of within the opportunity structure of the people that you want to be working with. So when things come up, they say, oh yeah, that Robert Anderson, he spoke Spanish, he wanted to do training. No, I still haven't done any training in Latin America, but I was suddenly I was in Japan and doing all, so it wasn't where I really wanted to. Eventually I did get work with the UN, and I've worked in many of the countries of Latin America. And so it's kind of the process that I always use. So if I want to go to a new country, the first time I went to Japan, I told everybody I was going to Japan, and somebody, the guy who owns the florist on 86th Street, he retired, he's not there anymore. He was actually friends with somebody who was president of the Japanese Marketing Association, and he gave me his name and introduced me, and that man eventually got me work in Tokyo as well. So there's a serendipitous aspect to this. So once you start pushing in a certain direction, this is kind of like an Oprah thing, I think, It's like the world starts kind of putting it together to help you get where you're going to go. And I think that, I love Oprah, I just want you to know that. Although I don't like her new channel so much, I can't get into that, but I used to like the show. Anyway, so I guess what I'm saying is that it's really important to do this kind of interviewing of people, and you don't necessarily know it's going to get you somewhere. I mean, certainly apply for jobs, look for jobs, but these are the kinds of things that help you get sort of into the hidden job market, which is kind of all around you, because things are evolving and changing all the time. So I think I've used my 10 minutes now.
So I'll back up before I met Robert, and then I'll tell you after I met Robert. Since it all centers around our meeting, and then our meeting. So my original career was in special education. I was a resource teacher. In those days, maybe they still have resource rooms now, but worked with kids with learning behavioral disorders. I also was an art major. And so the reason I got to Japan was because after I graduated school, I was offered a job, but it also learned, I went to school in Buffalo and I did not want to stay in Buffalo. So there also, you should always go to school where you may want to work because you meet people and network there. And I thought, no. So I went to Europe, I traveled, and I was studying art and studying Japanese calligraphy. And the teacher said, do you want to go to Japan, live with a family, teach English? I said, well, you know, I should do something serious with my life. And then I was snowed in on a horse farm where I was living for 3 days. And I said, what am I doing here? This is not what I want to do. Went to Japan, and I was teaching in the international school system, where I met another colleague of ours, Adair. And the first year I was there, I was just studying art and studying calligraphy and teaching English and living with a family. And I thought, that's not really what I want to do, because I don't even live with my own family. Why would I want to do that? Then I ended up staying in Japan, and I went to the American Embassy, and I looked up all the international schools, and I found some, and I met Adair, and then she hired me. And for 5 years, I was a resource teacher in the international school system. And I became interested in intercultural communication. And by that, because we had international school, lots of different situations, and many times families that were having difficulty would target the children as the problem so that they wouldn't have to deal with their marital issues. So I would be called in to do an assessment on children to see, do they really have learning problems, or is it the parents? And then that's how I became involved in what was called at that time the Tokyo Community Counseling Service. I worked with lots of different people on a team, and many people who had like bicultural families were having issues as well, cross-culture, and that's how I became involved in that. Came back to the US, I'd already got married and had one child at the time, and I wanted to make a transition into training and development, working in an organization. I was tired of working with children, and I was getting a little burnt out, and then I wanted to move up. But when you move up in K through 12 education, you usually move up into administration, and I didn't want to do that at the time. So I went to see a career counselor, and she was preparing me, giving me some assessments, you know, this is what you can do, and the range was like from here till there. You know, it's like all these different kinds of things. But it was very difficult. I'm sorry I didn't know that organization. It's very difficult to go from education to business because people don't value, in general, what you've done in education. Even though I created a room and I did all this and the resource room, the whole function and all that. So then I decided, and I got a job selling photocopiers, which gave me my business experience. I hated selling photocopiers because everybody hates their photocopiers because they don't use the copy. So then they hated me, I thought, and I would get so upset, but you're not using it right. So I did that, and then I ended up going back to Japan, and I transitioned into working in training and development, working with Japanese, usually businessmen, who were coming overseas to do business and then helping them with the cross-cultural aspects. And then I got hired at McKinsey & Company management consulting firm to be a training manager there. And that's how I met Robert, because there's a name of the group called the Training Forum. And it was for people working in foreign affiliated companies in Japan in HR and training and development. And so we would have guests who would fly in. It's always very exotic to fly into a place. People who live there, you could be the most talented person, but if you he flew in. You know, so I don't fly into places. Well, she flew in. So Robert flew in. And actually, I was the one who organized that workshop.
Yeah, I know.
To train the trainer. And it was make or break, for sure. So then in 1995, I came back to the US, and who did I know in New York? Robert. So Robert was my network. Robert was my node, my hub, right? So I said, Robert, I'm here, and I decided that I didn't want to go into an organization to work because most of the work was admin. I didn't want to do admin. I wanted to be there working with people. He introduced me to our colleague at the UN. So then I started doing training development at the UN. I met people who were working at the ICCCR, and that's how I came into Columbia University, very kind of sidetracked. But the reason I got to the UN also is when I was at McKinsey, I was doing a lot of intercultural work, a lot of work with conflict, a lot of work with leadership development, teams, multicultural teams, and negotiation. And that's how I made that transition. And I always say I've been in the field 25 years and in conflict all my life, so I know about conflict, especially a New York independent woman going to Japan in those days. First time I went was like a long time ago. So then I started to build my company from nothing. So I just came back here, I didn't have a network, I also joined a doctoral program. There's some kind of stress scale. I was like way overboard on the stress scale. I just bought a house, I had separated from my husband. It was just like all these different things happening at once, but I was focused. So then I started building my network and building my consulting company and also doing training and teaching at the ICCCR. And so the critical thing there is, yes, networking is everything. I've never gotten a job cold call. I don't think ever. Everything is who you know, and then it's what you know. So you always have to know, and you never know when people will come into your life, because it's kind of like a spiral. And you go around, and then suddenly that person who you knew back then comes back. So you have to be careful. You don't talk about people, because you never know who knows somebody else. You start to say something, and it's like, oh, you mean? I'm like, yes. You don't want to talk about anything bad. Yes, great person, you know. Anyway, so then I started building my business there, and the things I learned from special ed that come into play here is the idea about being able to break things down into its smallest components. Because when you do different kinds of tasks with kids who have learning issues, you have to give one direction at a time. You can't give multiple directions. Also, when you ask a question, you can't do that machine rapid fire where you ask several questions and they don't get a chance to answer. That overwhelms people. You have to ask one question at a time. So then how do I take all this into consideration? So I had intercultural communication. In my doctoral work, I learned about transformative learning, which is the adult development that Robert talked about as well. I started learning more and more about negotiation and conflict resolution. And then in my doctoral work, I also learned about CMM, coordinated management of meaning. And I used all of these things together, all 4 areas together, interconnected. When I go into an organization, I don't say all the time I do conflict resolution, because they don't, oh, we don't have conflict here. And I say, yeah, you probably, so do you have any disagreements or things like that? So when I go in, also from an organization development point of view, how do I get people in the room together who have different points of view? How do I get them to listen to each other, to facilitate that process, to get them from here to there, so at the end of the day they feel they've accomplished something. At least if they come to some agreement or not, they've heard each other to some degree. All of those kinds of skills that Jenny and Robert were talking about with communication come in over and over again. The other thing you learn that is very unique is that you learn how to listen for needs. You do different kinds of activities like 3-part listening. How do you separate the positions from the needs? I cannot tell you how critical that is, because even people say, yeah, I'm listening, they're not listening the way you know how to listen. They're not listening for the needs. So I can go in and somebody's telling me about whatever it is in my coaching situation or maybe in a client intake situation, but I'm listening in a different way than other people might listen to them. So I can pull out the needs and then I paraphrase it back. I go, yeah, you know, and then as though I said something brilliant. But I didn't. All I did was reflect back what they had told me. Years ago, I met somebody at McKinsey who then became training development manager, or director, I should say, at Goldman Sachs downtown. We went out for lunch one day, and he was a very good guy and did a lot of coaching. He said, you know, Beth, when consultants come and talk to me, if they don't ask me any questions, I don't want to talk to them. And I had thought earlier, I have to know the answers. How can I ask questions? If I ask questions, then they're going to think, well, what am I telling her? She should know the answers. So then he said, they have to ask me questions, because there's no way they can know about my company. And I said, you know, you have a good point. I don't know about your company, but I do know what I know about certain kinds of skills and other things. So you ask the questions, kind of like the informational interview. You're asking questions to get information. And what you're doing then is, well, what I do is you take that information and you go through your brain like quickly trying to figure out, what do I know that fits what this person is telling me about what this person needs? What story can I relate about some other project I've done? What question can I ask to build on what he's saying? So I'm always trying to figure out how can I connect to continue the conversation, because you want to build, and you don't want it to be loose, you want the conversation to go in a certain direction. Ideally, they realize you're so valuable they want to hire you to come in and do something. It doesn't always work, but you build the network and you do ask people, who do you know? Another thing that happened to me once was I knew somebody from Japan who had moved back here, and every once in a while we'd get together and have lunch. And I didn't ask her for a job. I didn't ask her for consulting work, but I said, do you know anybody? And she had referred me to other people. And then one day we were talking, so she said, Beth, what are you up to? So I just started saying whatever I was up to, and she said, listen, why don't you send me a proposal? I never expected to do something with her, but she had worked for Estee Lauder at the time, and I ended up doing some development program for her. I think it was in Singapore, my first trip to Singapore then. So you never know what's going to happen. So you talk to people, you connect people. Another tip people have said to me is, when you meet somebody, you always want to have a way of coming back. And there's a fine line between stalking and like networking and staying in touch. You want to stay on their radar screen. It's not that people don't want to be in touch with you, but they forget about you because they get busy. So you want to come back, and there's no set time like every 3 weeks. You don't do that. But if you see an article or you read about something or hear about something that connects to something that that person had said, you say, hey, I thought this might be of interest to you. And there's a way of staying on their radar screen all the time in that sense. I do a lot of work with teams because, as you know, anybody who's ever worked in a team or group project, right? There's always something that's going on. People just don't do it your way. They just don't listen to you, right? So how do you get into a team and help them work together more effectively? More people are being asked to do more with less. How does that work? So all of those skills and all of that goes into the topics that we're talking about. Most of us do our work in organizations. We also do work in communities, community mediation centers. I've worked with Board of Ed in different kind of towns in New Jersey. I've gone in and I've helped people there facilitating forums because you had a lot of angry parents thinking that their kids weren't learning math the right way. There was a math wars, and they called it the math wars. And the lovely thing about the internet is everything was on the internet, and all this was, and then I was on the internet. Oh, what are they talking about me for? So I would run these forums and write up a report and being able to facilitate them. I also once was coaching a principal who had a vote of no confidence, and I thought, how does she have the courage to get up every morning and go back into that school when all of the faculty and staff voted no confidence? They didn't believe in her. And I coached her for a year, and she managed to stay there for 2 or 3 more years, and then she retired. So that was, a great thing to do with these skills. It wasn't only about conflict. It was how does she communicate with her staff? How does she engage her staff? It's all about engagement and motivation. One other thing I wanted to mention is the whole idea about performance management. Most systems have formal performance management reviews, performance appraisal. But the informal conversations that don't take place but should are where people get into a lot of problems with employees and managers and organizations. And why do managers not do it? They just don't know how, they don't feel comfortable, they don't know what to say, especially if they expect that the person's going to be emotional. Like one of the worst things you can do sometimes is cry in an interview. Oh my God. We had 2 managers at McKinsey. One guy was the sensitive, empathic guy, and then there was the other guy. The empathic, sensitive guy had the box of tissues, and you were just using the box of tissues to give you a moment, and the other guy had a roll of toilet paper. And he said, here, wipe your eyes. So you want to know who you're crying in front of. So I would do performance management workshops with people so employees know how to ask for support from their managers, and managers know how to ask and give feedback, constructive feedback, without getting the big emotional overlay to it. So all these skills go into that, the listening, the empathy, asking the right kinds of questions, and not just asking questions to keep somebody engaged, but really ask questions that get you the information that you need that you can build on to go to the next step. Now we just open it up. I'd love you to ask questions, make comments, give some advice, some tips about things that you may have done that have worked for you, or things that don't work, not to do.
Do you have a good 2-minute spiel to describe to people when they ask you, so what is it that you're studying or doing? What is conflict resolution? Because I find myself just going, oh, well, people fight all the time. It's a personal skill.
So everybody's not going to have the same spiel, otherwise we'll all be like walking like robots now. But it's like the 30-second elevator pitch. And we learned this at McKinsey. They said, you walk into the elevator, you go into the client, and suddenly, just before the door closes, the CEO walks in. So you're freezing, and he says, how's it going? You're like, you can't you have to really be able to say something. Samaj, did you want to say a couple things?
Well, one thing I would stress is that you help people work together more effectively. Because that's really what you're doing, whether you're as a manager or as part of a team. It's the bigger picture of working together more effectively. Because what do most businesses want? They want you to produce. But you can't produce unless the team works together effectively or individuals work more effectively. So that's certainly something that conflict resolution brings. I think you made a point that really hits home, because we were trying at my center to do some more corporate work because we figured that's where the money was. And we went to a company and talked to them about conflict resolution. Now this is a big company. They couldn't stand the word conflict. To them, that's a negative, whereas more productive processes, more productive communication seems a positive. So if you can frame what it is you're providing or would like to provide in a positive, when you mention everybody fights, that sounds negative to them. But if you say, I help people become the best that they can be, or I can help teams work more effectively, that looks like a positive. And I think providing a positive outlook is something that people can link to, because they don't really like to think that there's something wrong where they're working, even though there always is.
Robert, do you want to add something?
For me, it's like there's 2 different kinds of elevators speeches, and I know some people don't like the elevator pitch, even calling it that, but I think you do need to be able to say something about yourself so people remember who you are and what you do. And so on the one hand, if I'm sort of marketing myself, I say I have a small training company and I focus on communication, conflict resolution, blah, blah, blah. Those are like people in HR or whatever. But when I was starting out, it was more about, in an informational interview, you're really trying to find where you're trying to find your place. So I think it's often to say something like, I've just completed my degree in conflict resolution at Columbia University, and I'm really interested in working more effectively with organizations and using, so you're kind of like, there's some kind of statement where like there's giving little pieces about yourself that kind of give the kind of the credibility, and also kind of the unique things. Like when I was starting off, I was saying, I'm really looking, my background is, I was a Spanish teacher, and now I've been working, I've completed my degree in adult learning, and I'm really looking to do training in Latin America. So it was kind of trying to put together the different things that I had in a way that would be interesting to people, so that when people would remember, yeah, that's the guy that's interested in training in Latin America. So when you're in an informational interview, after you've asked them questions, you can say to them, given that I'm interested in conflict resolution, I really want to work more effectively with organizations, I'm wondering what advice you would have to me in terms of how I can market myself. So this is, you're not so much selling yourself, you're more kind of searching for your audience, and you're trying to connect with people, and people give you really good ideas. So you're not at that point, an informational interview, you're not trying to market yourself, you're more about trying to get information and trying to connect with people. So I think having some kind of statement about what you're looking for, kind of what your vision is. What you don't want to do is say, I really don't know what I'm doing. I just graduated, I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to get some ideas from somebody. Because, you know, like, nobody wants to give information to somebody like that. They want to feel like there's some kind of plan here, some kind of intention that's meaningful in some way that they can maybe be part of. Because what you can find are really great mentors this way. And also, as Beth and I did, we've now worked together for 20 years just because, you know, we connected, and you find people like that. So you're starting out, so you need help from some of the people that have been doing it for a while. At least that's how I see it.
And I always say something about helping people develop more self-awareness about themselves and others, so they understand the impact they have on others, because that really impacts the relationship. So I try to help people have better quality relationships, and also how to, in a larger context, facilitate collaborative processes. But it depends on who I'm talking to, again, if I use that terminology or not. So I think a good thing to build on that would be, think about a few key points that you want to stress, and just make sure those are the key points you say, and just put it together in a little 1 or 2 sentences. And that would be good. Then again, it's targeted at who you're talking to. Something else? Yes.
For those interested in international politics, international relations, how does framing it, such as peace building or peacemaking versus conflict resolution, what's the difference between the three? And I'm interested in knowing if you see a distinction, or if people reply to it differently, or what's more effective.
So I think we can all answer this, but I think that recently what's happening is there's more of a buzz around peace building than there is around conflict resolution. So you want to hook people into where the buzz is, because that's where the energy is, that's where the funds are going, and that's the projects. But I wouldn't only say peace building or something like that. I'd say it's a little bit more about that. For example, for me, when I think about peace building, I'm thinking about post-conflict situations where we're trying to create infrastructure and trying to create a new economy, being a little bit specific like that, so that they build capacity, which is also in a big buzzword, building capacity, for sustainable peace, so that whatever peace they've attained, they can sustain that growth and change. So that's a little package in there. And what I would say is network in organizations that do that kind of work, and tangential. Because there are a lot of people, even like regular organizations, suppliers, corporations, who have to go in and send supplies into these kinds of areas. They need help being able to be on the ground in those kind of environments. So it's not just the nonprofits or the UN agencies that are in there. There are private organizations trying to go in there as well.
I just want to say one thing, sort of that international is not my area of expertise, but in anything that you go after, in any area that you're interested in going after, I think it's very important to do a little self-assessment as well, where you ask yourself these questions. Why is that area interesting to me? Why do I want? Because at some point, that's going to need to be raised up. But it also, remember, when you first came into this program and you went to the informational interview, one of the things we talked about was how much this program leans on self-knowledge, self-awareness. So it isn't just, oh, I just want a job, but to understand why you want that job, what it is, who you are, and how you can help marry who you are to the opportunity that's ahead of you. Whether it's international, whether it's local, whether it's not-for-profit, whatever it is, who are you, and ask yourself those questions. You're a very important component in what it is you sell. You are the component in what it is you sell. So if you want them to know you, you must know you.
I think building on what Jenny said, before I started working at AC4, I went on an interview at like a domestic peace organization on Long Island. And they asked me, I kept saying, oh, I'm really interested in conflict resolution, I'm really interested in peace. And one of the women in the room said, well, why peace? Like, why are you interested in this? And it came back to self-knowledge, and I realized I'm interested in this because of my family history, parents being divorced, always feeling like I was a mediator. So if you can really connect it to your personal history, I think that's helpful.
I think especially when I started with this program, I had difficulty talking about it with friends and giving them an idea of what I might be doing with it, because I was, what are you going to do with that afterward? But then after my internship last summer, I started just saying like what I did, and I didn't really use the word conflict anymore at all. And I think it ended up giving it, like, it's much easier for people to understand if you get rid of, like, you know, staying with conflict. I only say that if I mention the program name, and I just talk about what I did in facilitating, you know, community dialogues and helping them get action plans and all this other stuff. It just, you know, once I got used to saying what I did, it became kind of like my pitch. And I sounded, I think, like I knew what I was doing and the effect I had on people instead of just saying conflict resolution.
Do you remember something about what you might have said?
What's that?
Something you said? Could you say,
well,
give us a
big
sample?
part of what I did was going into communities to a lot of capacity building work and working on community dialogues in really tense situations. And so I would just speak to that. I go in and I plan with the community, with residents and nonprofits and government entities to plan a dialogue session, and I help them carry it out and just begin this dialogue and process of social change in their communities. But I mean, you know, I'm just change it, and as I speak about that more, I just became more confident in what I thought I was doing.
At least that's tangible, so people can get it. They say, oh, that's what it looks like. And even if you say conflict resolution, people don't get it. And if you say mediation, people may not get it.
Did you find that the ones that were in person were much different than the ones over the phone?
Yeah, because what happens is when you see somebody in person, you see their environment, and they get also a physical impression of you. I mean, you know yourself, if somebody calls you by phone, you don't remember them like the next day. You know, it's you actually. It's like a moment of meeting the person and a real connecting with them. So, and it doesn't take long. It's just, but really actually seeing the person. That's one of the nice things about Manhattan is we're so packed in here. You can see a lot of people in a short period of time.
Did you find the phone interviews worth them, or did you try to avoid them at all?
I avoided the phone interview. I would usually just use the phone to try to get 15 minutes of the person's time, and I was sort of relentless. Like I would call and leave a message. And if they didn't call back, I would call back the next week. And you know, and I always say, you know, leave the name John Smith suggested I give you a call. I have some questions about your business, and I would just keep asking until finally the person said, no, I don't want to talk to you. But I think sometimes it's hard for people. It's hard for people to pick up the phone. But I think picking up the phone is a direct way of trying to get a personal interview with the person. Again, you're only asking for 15 minutes. Usually people give you more time, but ask for 15. That's kind of what the rule is.
So now, in an email, in the subject heading, I'll put down introduction from somebody, if the name, so instead of just leaving the name on a telephone.
Your advice is actually really helpful. When I just use that similarly, but I also think it can be helpful if you volunteered certain organizations to, like, for instance, I got my job recently by volunteering through the Rotary Foundation and Rotaract, and they're very easy. They have a club on campus here. I'm personally part of the one that's the Rotaract New York at the United Nations, but they're very open to have anybody there. But I'm not necessarily marketing this one particularly, but I think that these are helpful, and by being in this group of you're in it with a lot of young college students, but they're directly linked to like Rotary International, and what that entails is there's usually a lot of people in there that are retired, but they're also
Still connected.
like connected to the businesses which they used to probably be the CEO of.
So in addition to volunteering, what I always would do is go into some kind of leadership position, take on responsibilities into these organizations, because then you get known. If you're in membership, then you're reaching out to all the membership, doing something. So it means an effort, but I think all of these organizations are volunteer organizations, and they need people to do a volunteer role. So get in there, do something, and be known. You add something?
And just kind of like the older people in an organization, you can just say, you know, I'm getting started in my field, whatever you want to call it, conflict resolution or working with dialogue. I'm wondering, do you know anybody who's doing that kind of work? And people open they don't have Rolodexes anymore. What do they have? They open something and give you names. You know, if they like you, they want to introduce you and they want to help you. And I think that's one of the things that's hard, is that sometimes you feel like, well, I've got my degree, I have to do it on my own, and I don't think anybody really does it on their own. You do it because people like you, because they want to help you, and because they think you have something to offer. So you need to get people that are kind of in your corner supporting you.
Even with LinkedIn, so I put something out there once and somebody I'd met in Singapore said, oh, Beth, and then responded to me, so you just keep building and connecting with people.
I was going to say one more thing that's related to all of that, I guess. I know it's been up and down, but the Global Community Forum, when that started, I joined that, and it was really interesting, and that's where I met Michael Britton. And it turned out he does trainings every now and then with the agency I interned with at the Department of Justice. And so there was that link there. And like finding where this network is and not knowing it's there. And then so Michael Britton then would talk about me with my director. And then it's like building this support that I'm not even really part of. I don't try to, elicit this, but Michael Britton will tell him what's going on at the Global Community Forum, and my director tells him what I'm doing there at DOJ. And then just paying attention also to where you are and learning about where you are. They had all these photos up in this office at Justice, and one was of Mort Deutsch. I'm a curious person, I don't know why you have this picture up. And it was from him, and they have lots of pictures up. No one on the staff there knew who Mort Deutsch was, but I happened to mention that to the director. I'm like, well, you have a picture of Mort Deutsch up there. What is that? And that was another connection then, because he was a fan of Mort Deutsch and all of his work. And so that just built it even more. And then he looked at the staff and said, see, you guys don't even know who this is. And he was a conflict resolution person, but that's what this agency tries to do. So it's also, I guess, just paying attention and learning about where you are and like latching onto that network that is already there.
Did you tell Mort that his picture was up on the wall of the DOJ?
I didn't.
You have to tell him that. I think he'd be quite impressed.
One thing that I've always done, and I've interviewed for all kinds of jobs, as well as when I was a journalist interviewing people, is sort of tagging the two together. It's not just what I can do for them if I'm in an interview, but talk to them and get them talking. Ask them about their organization. And one of the best people you can talk to are the secretaries, whoever that may be, because they've been there longer and they know how the organization really works. So if you get there 5 minutes early, you start a conversation, how it's going, and it winds up being pretty impressive afterwards when you don't get the job, but you call back and say, well, what can I do to make my resume better, or why did I bomb the interview, or do you have any tips? Well, many as the manager I've talked to, why are you calling back? Well, I want to get better. Oh, let's go out to lunch. Now I'm doing something a little different from what the average person was doing originally. And it's proven to be quite useful.
But sometimes you really don't know, so you're questioning yourself, but it could be that it was really just an inside promotion.
But it gives you a second chance to connect to that person, so you set yourself apart from the larger crowd. So it makes some sense to do that.
Though I'm probably much older than everyone here, I'm much newer to this field probably than everyone here. And so my questions, my musings are not well formulated. Please forgive me as I'm trying to piece through them. I'm quite conflicted about what I heard and how it impacts on my decisions, because what I've been examining pertains to development of a skill set more than a set of values. And specifically, for instance, I have two aunts who died of lung cancer. I could not see myself working to help tobacco companies work more effectively together, or the Pentagon, or the Wall Street firms which wreck the economy for millions of people. I helped to bring programs of the Morningside Center for Teaching Social Responsibility to my school district a few years ago. I thought that was very valuable for the year that they were there until government funding evaporated and they're having a difficult time. So what I'm asking really is, what is the reality of employment possibilities in organizations, whether it's nonprofit organizations or governmental organizations, whose mission would use these skills in a way that I would find is constructive? And I hope that you don't just reinforce my impression in the little conversation that I've had with people who are saying that in this era of sequester, these programs are the first to be cut. In the era of austerity, nonprofit budgets are the first to be cut. And I wonder then, is there really a future in this field?
I think I can respond a little bit to that because I work in a not-for-profit. And so maybe some of what I have to say will have resonance for you. While it is true that we face the daunting challenge of cuts, when I run the center, that I don't simply take the cut like a hit on the chin. I have to figure out a way to keep my people employed. So I look at grants, and I look at other opportunities or ways to create fee-for-service options. It still remains a not-for-profit so long as the money that you make goes back into the organization and provide services for people who can't afford them. For example, I charge people for divorce mediation. I do it on a sliding scale, so I recognize that people who are at the very lowest end of the income bracket, they'll pay us $25 an hour. And that's fine with us. But the reason I charge people who make a great deal of money somewhat more, considerably more, is so that I'm able to provide those services for $25. So I wouldn't necessarily feel that in the age of the sequester and the way the economy has been going, there's going to be no not-for-profits or there are going to be fewer opportunities. I don't think that's the case. I think there will always be the not-for-profit sector, but it will require some other kinds of skills, and maybe you can bring them. You sound like you did something very innovative, bringing something to your school district. Well, that's the kind of thinking that is important in a not-for-profit, but you have to think of yourself as an actor, not a reactor. So how am I going to keep this not-for-profit alive? How am I going to be part of the team that keeps it dynamic and relevant? And it's not just waiting for the world and its impact on you, but how you're going to support the thing that's important to you. So I wouldn't be so discouraged. I would go ahead and look for the kinds of organizations that have meaning for you and start to say to yourself, well, what can I bring to the table that's useful for them? What do they need me for that I can bring? Am I clever enough to figure out a way to get a program funded? Or do I want to learn how to do that? And if so, then who do I need to talk to, a la what Robert is saying, to figure out how to become part of that? But first you have to find out what are the organizations that you really care about or you think do the kind of work you do. But I wouldn't just throw up your hands in despair, because I don't think that's at all true. I think there'll always be need, and when there's a need, There are people who run organizations to fill those needs. And they do it because they care, but they also do it because they need to stay employed. And so I work very hard to keep every single one of the people that work in my organization employed. They count too. It's not just who you serve, but it's the organization. You must keep that organization healthy in order for it to continue to do its work well. So don't get discouraged. Just find out where you want to go.
Yeah, and building on that, I think that, like you say, the nonprofit sector is a very big sector, and oftentimes they have even more of a need than, say, companies that can pay for a lot of training. They haven't had the same kind of training, so there are opportunities where there are people working together in organizations. They have conflict. They need the same kinds of interventions, and in some ways, there's even more opportunity there. The pay is not as much, but there's certainly opportunities there.
Sometimes you can help create little consortiums, because if one organization doesn't have the funding or a school doesn't have the funding to pay for this, if you put together consciously a couple of different schools or organizations to create one workshop or one initiative, they can pool their resources together. The other thing, for a while, I used to be nicknamed Pro Bono Beth, because sometimes I just go in and do things pro bono or at a big reduced rate. So kind of like my own sliding scale, when I do coaching in an organization that's a nonprofit, I do it at a much lower rate than I do for a private corporation. In terms of values and ethics and all of that, if you're not comfortable with the organization and their mission and the practices that they're doing, then I would say don't work there. But if there are places that, even if they, if the organization itself is kind of like not necessarily doing something harmful, but individuals might be doing something harmful in there, then you have to figure out if you can make an impact there or not. My experience is, in general, organizations are really tough places to work, whatever organization it is. And sometimes nonprofits are harder, because what I find is people who are working in mission-driven organizations have more emotions and more passion about what they're doing, and every little thing becomes a much bigger deal, whereas people working for a financial institution, they know what the mission is and they're not as emotionally engaged in what the mission of that organization is. People need support and people need help everywhere, so that's how I enter into it. And if I had to work for a tobacco company, if a tobacco company came to me, which I haven't had that situation yet, I wonder what I would do. And if I'm working with coaching somebody in an organization, any kind of organization, there's always that element that you might be coaching them out of the organization if that organization is not a good fit for them too. So you have to figure out, part of the self-awareness piece, what are your values and if the organization meets that or not. If it doesn't, I would say don't do it. Still a lot of demand out there, but it's a matter of how do you go in and fit and be there in the right time, in the right place, and say the right thing to the right person, and then it just clicks. It's all of those elements together. It's not magic, but it's all like serendipity in some ways. Planful serendipity, maybe.
I'm wondering if anybody has had a full-time position within a company, for-profit or government entity, that was as a conflict resolution practitioner, because we've spoken about nonprofit.
Ombuds people do?
No, I mean personally.
Oh, here?
Is there anything you can talk about in the for-profit or government world from personal experience, or anybody that you're close to that does conflict resolution work in those areas?
Well, there are people who do conflict management systems, so they work inside for conflict management system design. That's one element. People who do ombuds work, people who do training development, but it's not only conflict resolution, it's communication skills and other things, but conflict and negotiation could be in there as part of it.
Also employee relations, I haven't done it, but that's a big function in most organizations, working out the conflicts between supervisor and staff and between different departments, so that's another big piece.
As a mediator? As a mediator, when you work on it?
It's not like usually a formal mediation, but it's like conversations to try to, work through procedures.
So I work in for-profit, I work in advertising, and really how I've been able to meld the two things is realizing that what I'm doing is managing a process, right? So my thing is creative process and managing conflict within creative process. And what does that do? That actually leads to innovation if you effectively manage conflict. So I've been struggling with how to use the conflict resolution and like what that means, and I think it's really about managing process.
Well, you can stir up some conflicts, so then you can go in there and resolve it.
Very good.
I'm good at that too. So you can really demonstrate, showcase your skills, And then there's also the whole field of education. People do go into working in education, doing training and development, or like for outside of an educational system, or doing it in K through 12 schools, preschools, different kinds of games and activities people can use, doing it all the way through junior high school, middle school, and high school, universities, and things like that people do. And some people from our program have graduated and done that in different settings.
Our organization, the Westchester and Rockland Mediation Centers, for 10 years were the agency that responded to the grant from that was given to the schools. Many times you'll have schools or government entities that have the grant, and then they come to the not-for-profit and ask them to deliver the service. And we had a huge school program. We still have a program, it's just not quite as big because the 10-year life of the grant ran out, and so somebody has to figure out now another grant. But that's the education field all the way up is filled with opportunities. If you are creative enough to see what grants are out there, sometimes coming to an organization with an idea is a great way to get into that organization.
So you co-author and co-sponsor the grant.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was thinking, if you want to become a consultant, as a conflict resolution consultant, how do you start? If you want to develop a program, a curricula, do you develop something general, and then you pitch it to organizations? If it's not organization, if it's an issue, some, let's say, international issue, how do you go about it to find out what is needed so that you cater it exactly to what the issue is?
There are different ways of working with clients, and some clients go very deep, meaning that they really try to understand what the need is, and they try to create a whole system to kind of deal with the conflict within the organization. Another way to do it is to do training. So you can do both together, but for example, since I travel a lot and I go lots of different places, I tend to just focus on training. So I'm really focusing on individuals in the organization and trying to help them deal more effectively with conflict. So if somebody's asking me to do a more in-depth project, then I'm turning it over to somebody like Beth or somebody who does a more kind of, they're really looking at the organization itself and how they're going to create a system to help that organization manage conflict more effectively. So I don't know if you want to
I was going to add on to that and say, if you have an area of expertise, so let's say it's like financial institutions, right? So you work in financial institutions, you then know what goes on in a financial institution, so you're speaking from somebody from the inside who knows the industry, and then you can go to somebody else in a financial institution and say, I know from you're doing an informational interview, and you're building and getting the situation there and saying, I know from my own experience, these are some of the issues that people face, and these are the things I think that could really help do that. So you want to match the conflict resolution skills to a particular industry that you have knowledge and expertise about. Then it makes sense, because people usually say, what do you know about my industry, or what do you know about my organization? You're right, I may not know all the things about your organization, but I've worked in other organizations or another organization in your industry, and I know about that, and I'm just wondering if you have the same kind of issues. I wouldn't go in there saying I know about you, I know you have problems. I wouldn't go in there saying that, but saying based on my other experience, I imagine this could be a need that you may have.
I'm thinking more of international development work, for example.
International development organizations, one of the things that they need desperately is this work, especially when they're on the ground and they need to interface, or they don't, but they should interface with other development organizations. So partly if it's people coming together from different countries, now you have the whole multicultural, intercultural aspect of it. If there are people flying into a place that they're not familiar with, or that is really difficult conditions, the stress of that can add to it. So you bring that into it. You know, being able to have your resources there when you need them and they don't always arrive, that can be stressful. How do you build that? And managing stress. So you want to find out what it is that the buzzword or the hook that they're dealing with that you can address. Because the reality is a lot of the skills we do can really be applied to so many situations, but what's the word that's going to hook them? If they have team issues and team's the word, or stress or trauma, then you want to hook into that, but you don't know that until you get that information. But you can ask about that if you're familiar with the industry and familiar with other organizations.
I also think a good tool in any area that you're looking for, when you're starting to explore opportunities and you want to figure out how to get in, I say it's a good opportunity to find a friend who you respect and practice the information gathering, because that's critical. People, I think they're happy to do informational interviews, but if you're looking to sell them something, then you're doing something slightly different. So you have to have a lot more information in hand. And I would practice with somebody who you trust, you feel, you all have, look, we talked about networks. You have a network. Pick one of your colleagues and say, this is the area I want to go in. And let them ask you some questions that you can't answer. And then you get those answers for you. And the same thing is true to use the informational format that Robert talks about. To inquire, to learn, to get, before you go for the job, make sure you have lots of information and lots of questions. And so I wouldn't just say, oh, I know I want to go do that kind of thing. You want to do that kind of thing? Find out everything you can about that thing. And then practice with somebody, one of your colleagues, to see if you know everything that they might, ask of you. And when you don't, then you go fill in those gaps. Because people, when they're having people come in to offer them a program, an idea, something they're going to have to pay for, they want to know you're worth paying for. So come in complete, knowing your business, knowing something about their business, and feeling as though you're prepared, even if you don't have the answer, you're prepared to mull it over and get back to them. All of those things, that says to them, she's thinking, she's awake, she's not just looking for a job. You're not looking for a job, you're making a career change here through this thing. It's more than a job. A job you get at McDonald's. Here, you're making a change. And maybe the change you make in yourself will impact the change you make there. And that's important to people. Otherwise, why hire somebody? Why bring somebody in? Unless it's just to fill in a little spot. That's more, you're looking for more if you're coming to this program.
So another way of building information is interning. And when you're a student is when you intern. You can't really be an intern when you're not a student. So while you're a student, take advantage of being an intern, because then when people get to know your worth from the inside, it may turn into a job eventually. And it does sometimes. And the internship experience, then you can say, well, I have experience doing this, can also lead you even to a different job. Another thing is if there's somebody who's doing work that you like to do, then you may get connected to them and maybe ask if you can shadow them, if you can work with them just to observe what it is they do and how they do it. But sometimes when you see the finished product, you don't know what the process was and how they got there. So you may be able to shadow them. Another thing is if you can't intern or shadow, maybe you can volunteer in a particular organization for a few months. Say, I'm willing, see what their volunteer program is, and then by volunteering and being inside of that program, then you're learning what they do and you're building a network there as well. They may end up hiring you, or they may refer you somewhere else. Because once you're known, you're a known entity. If you're good, then it's to your advantage. If you're not, then you got to go somewhere else. But if you're good and they get to see you, then they're taking less of a gamble on you, and then people like that better than taking a gamble.
The other thing, somebody just mentioned this to me, it was actually Nora who was telling me that if you are on unemployment, which I hope you're not, but if you are on unemployment, you're allowed to have a certain length internship that allows you, through the unemployment process, so long as you report to the unemployment process, not to be actively searching for work and get penalized for not actually searching. So you have to find out from your local unemployment office, but that is a very useful time because if you are transitioning and you are on unemployment, these kinds of internships, if you're not a student, are available. I mean, you are all students here, but some of you will graduate or have graduated from the program and you're still trying to figure it out. I did hire 2 people. Our restorative justice initiative began with a woman coming to me and saying, I want to do something with criminal justice. And together we went to a training, and I just paid for her training. That's all I did. I didn't pay her. Until she started this program, and then together with this program established, we went to seek funding. And I hired her to run the program. So it's not as though that can't happen. And the same thing is true with my custody visitation coordinator. She started out volunteering for us to help out because we needed an intern. And she was able to do it. Now, the rules around internship are a little bit more rigid, But there are opportunities if you're a student, and there's certainly opportunities as well if you're on unemployment. So you should, if any of you find that you're going to be on unemployment or on unemployment, look into that, because it's a real, it's a
Planned happenstance.
right, planned happenstance.
And I know that a lot of a segment of the population, they're interested in doctoral degrees, and I was wondering, within the broad field of conflict resolution, are there certain types of positions that require that kind of training?
I would say that if you're going to be doing any kind of a needs assessment, conflict analysis, sometimes they want that, and sometimes monitoring and evaluation. Depends, but if you're only doing like large quantitative kind of studies, then a doctoral degree is good. But I don't think it's critical. I think that having the right skills in the right place, or unless you want to teach in academia, if you want to teach in a higher education setting, then you need a doctoral degree.
So a lot of what we're talking about is about making personal connections and networking, which is easier for some people than it is for others. So I guess thinking about when you first started out, what were some, I don't know, confidence building techniques or pep talks that you gave yourself so you could comfortably and confidently say, I'm the right person for this organization and this is why, without feeling like you were boasting or selling something that you really couldn't do?
One thing I did is that when I was at home and I would make phone calls to people, I would always get dressed and not be in my pajamas because I felt like they knew. They knew that I was in my pajamas, but something about my voice would sound different. So I would actually get dressed to do it. Not all the time. Now I'm still in my pajamas sometimes. But at the beginning, I would always get dressed because I wanted to get into that professional mindset like that. And I would join lots of organizations and just keep networking.
I joined a transition support group. That really helped me a lot. And that's where I learned all of this stuff about networking, because one thing is to learn it, mentally, but to actually do it, and then to have people say, okay, you say, I'm going to meet with 3 people by the next time we have a meeting, and people would kind of hold you to it. So that's the kind of thing, career organizations do it, but I think you can do it with your colleagues. If you're in kind of a similar situation, you can do it with each other, to kind of just encourage each other and support each other in the kinds of decisions that you're making, the people that you're meeting. So
but volunteering in organizations helps, because you're not selling yourself, but you're meeting people, and naturally if they're meeting people and doing things, you're selling yourself because they're getting to see what you can do.
Oh, it's so true, because if you do work with an organization and you do provide a real service, but that's the key. You can't just be there looking for what you get. You have to really be doing something. And if you're really impressive to them, even if they don't have a job, you'd be surprised at how often somebody says, listen, there's this job. That's how I got my job as director of the Mediation Center. I was working at another mediation center doing filing and mentoring and anything I could do. I started out volunteering, and then I worked for $8 an hour. And it wasn't all that long ago, so it wasn't that, it was 15 years ago, but it wasn't 30 years ago where $8 an hour was something, it was pretty bad, rotten pay. But that director saw my commitment to that process and to the work. So when this came up, I didn't see it, this job. He said to me, apply. I said, oh, I can't apply. He said, apply. And I had to look at what I had in my background that contributed. And so going back to that notion of, it isn't boasting, it's telling the truth. You have skills, and you just have to sit down and take the time to say, what are my skills, and how can I, what do I offer this company? Why should they hire me? And because I need a job isn't the answer, right? What can I give them? And you should practice. But I think your informational interview piece is also a tremendously valuable tool for practicing for job interviews as well, because that gives you an opportunity to be before someone in a way that engages people. That's what people, you have to stand out. They're interviewing 30 people for this position. You have to stand out. And that process will help you learn how to do that.
I have an advice in this matter. I'm not a pessimist, but my reality testing score is very high. So I thought that, what's the worst that could happen that I stay in the same place that I am right now? So there is nothing you can lose by going out and starting your own network and asking for a job or going to an interview. The worst that could happen is that you stay the same way you are.
And if they say no, you say, well, you're lost, not mine.
I was wondering, is there a way we can figure out from the program, like where past students might have interned? I actually got my internship this semester because somebody else in the program had interned there, referred me, and I thought it would be great that once we leave, I think we're going to leave a good legacy with them that, future students.
We hope you leave a good legacy. Because we want it to be like a revolving door. We send one student in and another student comes in. So we could compile that list. We're already compiling a list about what alumni are doing. There is the internship fair that AC4 sponsors every spring. So those are different ways of doing it. But yes, we could. So where are you interning?
New York Peace Institute.
That's right. So we should have that on a list somewhere. Let me Connie and Roshan for the list takers. We need lists. Yeah, it is a good idea, because I know that when Danny was here, he worked for the DOJ during last summer, and they had a good situation. There was somebody named Daniel who worked at FINRA and had a good situation. And usually a lot of these organizations take other kinds of people, it's like law students, but they took a chance on a conflict resolution student. They said, this conflict resolution stuff is pretty good. And the people who showed up did a good job, so it was a good light. If there isn't anything else, we might bring this to a close unless somebody has something else to say. We still have time, but if not, we are happy that you all came. Hope you found this valuable. If there are some ideas you have that you want us to help you with, we'd be happy to hear them. Notice I didn't say happy to do them. But happy to hear them, and if it works out well for us, we'll help you do them. Notice I said help you do them, not that we will do them. But Anchors is also a good organization, student organization. We have some representation here tonight, but Anchors as a group, as your student group, can also work with us to think about how we can come together and do things. Maybe we can have informational interview practice sessions, or maybe we can think about putting together a big networking information and networking session or something like that. I'm happy to help you with that. Thank you.
Thank you.